Hello, everybody, and welcome to the sixth installment of the American Civil War lecture series with Dr. Tom. So, if you like this video that we're about to take a look at, if you please click on the like button, and of course, please also remember to subscribe at the end of it as well. Now, today we're going to be focusing on the post-Dred Scott period. And so 1858 on through to the election in 1860, the presidential election, which we'll see Abraham Lincoln elected as president of the United States. But we'll start by looking at this famous painting, and it is not historically accurate in the slightest, nor is it meant to be. And it actually shows a group of events from American history all tied in together. And so obviously the most standout aspect of this painting is the gentleman in the center with the very large beard. No, that's not Karl Marx, that's John Brown. And we've talked about John Brown before, because you remember when we were talking about Bleeding Kansas, the Totopotomoy Creek massacre, which he led, where he and his sons cut the throats of a number of pro-slavery settlers in Kansas. And you do see actually a lot of aspects of Bleeding Kansas represented in this painting itself. So, for example, on the left, you see the tornado, which has touched down on the prairies. Of course, Kansas is the prairie state, and it is known for its tornadoes, and that's not something cooked up by the Wizard of Oz. That is the way it is. It is very prone to tornado activity. And then on the right hand side, it's also Kansas, but you can see it's on fire. That represents the fire of Laurence. But on both sides of John Brown, left and right, you will see the wagon trains coming through, settlers moving from east to west, and with that, all sorts of problems are coming with them. Are they pro-slavery? Are they anti-slavery? And this is, as we mentioned before, Bleeding Kansas was a sneak preview of the American Civil War, as was another incident which happened in 1859 in Harpers Ferry, Virginia, which again will involve John Brown. But John Brown is often referred to as someone who kicked off the American Civil War. And so you will see here, look at John Brown's feet. On the left, a dead Union soldier from the north. On the right, a dead Confederate soldier from the south. And on right and left, you see people facing each other, armed and fighting. In fact, you even see the Stars and Stripes, which was the flag of the Union in the Civil War, and on the right you see the Stainless Banner, the flag of the Confederate nation from 1863 to 65. And so basically, John Brown is dead before this war breaks out. He is going to be dead before any Confederate flag is first stitched together. But we are very much tying John Brown to the Civil War with this painting. And so he is one of the principal causes of this war's breaking out. And that is one very crucial aspect that will be explored throughout this lecture. But we won't start there. Right, now let's start actually at 1858, and we are going to have a fight in the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, this shouldn't come as a huge surprise to you. We've already had the incident where Preston Brooks viciously attacked Charles Sumner in the Senate with his cane, and he was egged on to do that by the gentleman here on the right, Laurence Keitt, one of his colleagues, representatives from South Carolina. And Keitt started a fight in U.S. Congress, in the House of Representatives, in 1858. And it caused a massive brawl between Southern and Northern congressmen. And actually, Laurence Keitt got knocked unconscious, punched straight in the face, and knocked out. That didn't end the fight. It kept going on, and finally what happened was Representative Barksdale of Mississippi, he had a large wig on his head. And what happened was a northern representative went behind Barksdale, ripped his wig right off his head, held it up in the air, and he shouted at the top of his lungs, "I scalped the son of a bitch!" And immediately after that, everyone, or almost everyone, in the chamber broke out laughing. And it was that bout of laughter which caused the fight to end. Thank God. And life then went on. But, of course, the fight doesn't end there. We are going to leave the chamber of the House of Representatives. We are going to leave 1858, in fact, and we're going to go now to 1859 and focus again on John Brown. Now, you will recognize Brown in this photograph here. Same man as we saw on the first image in the painting. And John Brown, remember, made a pledge to God that he would give his life to eradicate the United States of the institution of slavery. And he decides he is going to do that in 1859 once and for all. And his plan was very unrealistic and brings into question, what state of mind John Brown is in to come up with this plan. But the plan was to cross the Potomac River into Virginia to a small town called Harpers Ferry. And why Harpers Ferry? Harpers Ferry has a large federal arsenal. Now, what Brown has in mind is go to Harpers Ferry, take over the arsenal, get the weapons from there. And when that happens, slaves in the town will flee from their masters, will join Brown's gang. The weapons from the arsenal will then be distributed to those slaves who join them. Extra weapons from the arsenal will also be taken. And because this insurrection, as some people call it, rebellion as others call it, was not supposed to take place just in Harpers Ferry. It was to spread throughout Virginia. When it reached the border of North Carolina, Tennessee, that rebellion was going to spread further south, further southwest, on and on and on. And it was supposed to be a nationwide rebellion against slavery, and it was going to start in Harpers Ferry, Virginia. That is Brown's plan. Now, let's see what happens. Okay, now, obviously, this is a contemporary photograph of Harpers Ferry today. And I'll start by basically giving a bit of an update. Harpers Ferry is now in the state of West Virginia. Now, West Virginia did not exist in 1859. We will go into the creation of the state of West Virginia later in this series. But for now, Harpers Ferry is in Virginia. But in this photograph here, with these newer bridges, post-Civil War bridges, that is West Virginia. Now, this is a beautiful photograph, and I love how it covers the geography of the area. That Harpers Ferry is actually a peninsula section of Jefferson County. Jefferson County, being named after obviously Thomas Jefferson. Now, if you look on the left-hand side, so just left that peninsula, you will see the ruins of an earlier bridge, which was there during the Civil War. And you will also see that river there, which flows next to those old pillars. That is the Shenandoah River, which of course is a very significant river when we get to this war. And it is dumping into another very important, very strategic river. That is the Potomac River, which flows right next to Washington, D.C. It is the southern border of the capital, Washington. Now, this photograph is taken from Maryland. So you can see that the Potomac River is the border of Maryland and Virginia. Now, Maryland is a southern state. It's a slave state. Potomac River at this point is not yet the border between North and South, but it will be in 2 years' time. And the Shenandoah River, well, that river will bear its own significance when we get to this war breaking out. But that peninsula there is is Harpers Ferry, and that is the town John Brown is going to raid in 1859. And he has got a very small gang, much smaller than what Nat Turner had. And he's got only 21 people total in this gang. 16 of them are white, leading this insurrection against slavery. 5 of them are free blacks. So he goes to Harpers Ferry and he starts the rebellion. Now, I can't show you pictures of the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry because it is now gone. It burned down in 1861. We'll go into more details about that later. But what does remain is the fire engine house right next to it. Now, of course, it's handy to have a fire station next to an arsenal. Gunpowder explodes, so a good safety measure there. But what happened was John Brown took the actual arsenal, but he wasn't able to hold on to it. It's too big. And right after he got into it, a militia group led by Colonel John Gibson, local militia, started fighting Brown, and Brown and his men retreated into this fire engine house. And they stayed holed up in there and barricaded the doors shut, and the militiamen could not get in. All right, now this arsenal in Harpers Ferry, although this is taking place in Jefferson County property, Virginia state property, the arsenal itself is federal property of the national federal government of the United States. And because it is a federal installation which is under attack, that means that the federal army of the United States is going to get involved, and the Marines are going to be sent in. They're going to be led by a gentleman named Colonel Robert E. Lee. Notice that beardless man on the left with the mustache. And he has an officer underneath his command named Lieutenant James Ewell Brown Stuart. But he prefers to go by the name JEB. And notice that clean-shaven gentleman on the right. Okay, now, they are going to relieve Gibson's militia, and they will take charge of attacking the fire engine house next to the arsenal. And they will be the ones who are going to arrest Brown and his gang, at least those who don't get killed in the process, which some of them will. So there you can see a very well-known sketch of the U.S. Marines attacking the fire engine house at Harpers Ferry, commanded by Colonel Lee. And he is arrested. Brown is arrested, and he is arraigned at this courthouse. That is Jefferson County Courthouse. That is in the county seat of Charlestown. Don't confuse Charlestown with Charleston, West Virginia. This is a different city altogether. So this is in Jefferson County, the easternmost county in West Virginia today. And of course, back then, all that was Virginia. So Jefferson County, Virginia, as it was at the time, that is where John Brown's trial is going to take place. Here's the interior as it is today. It is still a fully functional courtroom, a courthouse, I should say. And I want you to please notice the railed-in area in the middle of the courtroom, which is still there. Now, I'm going to change slides and keep an eye on those railings there in the middle. And you'll see that they are also present there in Brown's trial in late 1859. And John Brown was put on trial for leading insurrection, also for treason. Treason, that's the interesting charge. So treason. Why treason? Well, he attacked the federal government. He attacked a federal building, the federal arsenal. And so, yes, treason charges will be brought out as well against John Brown. And he is found guilty, as are 6 of his co-conspirators who also are put on trial in the same place. Execution is planned. They're all to be executed. Hanging was the execution method back then. Now, there was some concern by the governor at the time who feared that there could be attempts to free John Brown. Perhaps abolitionists might flock down to Virginia to try to save his life. And therefore, there was concern that there might not be enough security at the execution itself. So to help maintain law and order, Governor Henry Wise of Virginia, got in contact with General Francis Henry Smith at the Virginia Military Institute. General Smith was the superintendent of VMI, as the Virginia Military Institute is better known as. And Smith charged Major Thomas J. Jackson, U.S. Army, to lead the cadets to Harpers Ferry to help maintain law and order. Now, Major Jackson is a professor of physics, mathematics, and artillery at VMI. What a combination of subjects that is. So Jackson does take the Corps of Cadets up there. And John Brown is taken out of the Jefferson County Jail that morning in December 1859 to the gallows. Now, again, this is a painting which has some accuracies and some inaccuracies. The accuracies are, look at the United States soldiers, blue uniforms, armed very heavily. What's inaccurate, it shows John Brown on his way down the stairs kissing a black baby. That did not happen. There were no slaves or anybody who was able to get anywhere near John Brown. No civilians were able to get near him when he was being escorted out of the jail. So again, obviously this is a very good, very vivid looking oil painting. But the artist is obviously trying to make a political point here. And obviously the artist is someone who sees John Brown as having done the right thing. And so you have the execution itself. There are no photographs from the incident itself, just illustrations of 5 people who were there. Now, you see the scaffold there, which Brown has already got the white flour sack over his head, noose around his neck, tying his legs together there as well. Look at the troops who were closest to the actual scaffold. Those are United States Army and some other militia groups there. Now look at the ones that are closer towards us with the garrison cover styled hats. Those are that's part of the contingent of the VMI Corps of Cadets who is there to help maintain law and order. So at this execution were Major Thomas Jackson, Lieutenant JEB Stuart. One of the militia groups who was present was the Richmond Greys, and they had a member there by the name of John Wilkes Booth, who, of course, will become very famous 6 years later. We will get to that when we get to that. Also present was Edmund Ruffin, the fire eater who we discussed in the previous lecture. So it was a very high-profile event. There were no attempts, at least that we know of, to free John Brown during the execution. So it did happen rather quickly and without any events other than the actual execution itself. Now, this is the actual site of John Brown's execution today, and you can see the Civil War trails tablet there on the other side of the fence. Now, this all was fields back then. The house was built there in the late Victorian era, and actually, funny enough, it was built by Colonel John Gibson, the man who actually oversaw the execution itself and the guy who led the militia group who first responded to John Brown's raid on Harpers Ferry. So ironic that he built his own house on that site. If you look on the right side of the photograph, on the other side of the pavement, sidewalks, as they say in the United States, you will see part of the metal marker, noting the significance of the site. And there it is close up there, so you can pause it if you wish to read that. And that is really all that's left of the site where John Brown was executed. Now, John Brown, after he was executed, was then returned to Harpers Ferry because of its prominent location on the Potomac River, where it'd be easy to transport his body, and his body was transported back to his home of North Elba in New York. Now, for you British people watching this, this is New York State, not New York City. So that is where John Brown is buried. Now, unlike most tombstones, his is encased in glass. Very interesting. And if you look at the large boulder behind his burial site, you'll see the plaques on there. Those are both dedicated to the memory of John Brown. And we now need to examine the response to John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. And the response was varied, as I'm sure you can imagine. So let's first look at the Southern response to it. So let's look on the left-hand side. This is an excerpt taken from the front page of the Richmond Examiner, Richmond, Virginia, that is, a southern state, and obviously it's going to be very critical of John Brown. Look at that first line, fearful and exciting intelligence. So you see they're instilling fear already. Negro insurrection at Harper's Ferry. So again, the same language we saw with Nat Turner's rebellion. And it goes into the fact that there is a greater conspiracy. This is only part of a big conspiracy, but it says a Negro conspiracy, and that basically states that free blacks are behind this, not just white people like John Brown and the white people who went with him. Also, slaves were suspected as playing a role in this wider movement to start a massive insurrection all around the South. And this newspaper does help spread that rumor, which actually is false. But it doesn't change the fact that a lot of slaves were tortured badly to get any information they could out of them. And the only information they got out of them was false and was given to them just so they would stop torturing them. And now, so fear-mongering, paranoia, that's what happens throughout the South as a result of John Brown's raid. You end up having more arsenals and armories built by the individual state governments scattered throughout their states to prepare for the next insurrection, whenever and wherever that will be. And you will have more militia groups formed throughout the South to be ready to respond to any potential insurrection, which might kick off at some point. And the South is of the mindset, it's not a matter of if there's another insurrection, it's a matter of when there's another resurrection. And the South is angry. In fact, they go further to blame the Republican Party for John Brown's raid. And they go further than that to argue that Abraham Lincoln, who is the Republican nominee for the presidency in the upcoming 1860 election, they accused Lincoln of being a supporter of John Brown's actions, and they had no evidence at all to accuse him of that, but they do anyway. And Lincoln responds to that, saying that he had nothing to do with it, and that he was very critical of people who came up with malicious lies suggesting that he had. And Lincoln also asserted that he had no plans to interfere with slavery where it existed. And that all came out in a speech that he delivered in New York shortly after the John Brown episode was over. But while we're talking about the North, let's talk about the Northern response to John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. He was treated in a lot of quarters of the North as a hero, a martyr, a man who gave his life standing up for the freedom of those who were enslaved. And he became almost like a saint in the eyes of abolitionists. Not all Northerners agreed with that. There were a lot of people, especially in the Northwest, or the Midwest as it's called now, who were very critical of what John Brown had done. But it was in New England where he got quite a lot of support. And in fact, when the war does break out, one of the popular songs that the Union, the Northern Army, will march to is one called John Brown's Body. And it is sung to the tune of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. So there's no question about it. John Brown has a lot to do with the outbreak of this Civil War, and specifically when it breaks out. He has a big impact on the 1860 presidential election. So let's talk about that election now. So we have actually 4 candidates for the presidency. The Republican candidate, as I've already mentioned, is Abraham Lincoln. Notice he is still beardless at this point, as he was in the Lincoln-Douglas debates 2 years earlier. Stephen Douglas is another contender in this election. Douglas, of course, has been a career-long Democrat, but we have a problem with the Democratic Party at this point. They have split into 2 parties, the Northern Democrats and the Southern Democrats. They don't see eye to eye anymore. Southern Democrats no longer see Northern Democrats as fighting viciously enough to defend slavery. And some of them don't trust them that they would defend slavery. So Stephen Douglas represents the Northern Democrats. John C. Breckenridge, who at this point is actually the serving Vice President of the United States on the bottom left. He is going to be the Southern Democratic candidate. Now, John C. Breckenridge is from Kentucky. So a upper South state, a border South state, as some people would say. And the 4th candidate is John Bell, bottom right, of the Constitutional Union Party. Now, the Constitutional Union Party is specifically in favor of maintaining the United States Constitution, hence its name. And what they insist on is basically moving the country forward and preserving the Union, whatever the cost. They make a point of not even discussing slavery in their manifesto or in anything that they present publicly. They try to avoid it as much as possible. But John Bell is from Tennessee, an upper South state. So a lot of Northerners immediately recognize him as a Southerner, as someone who's pro-slavery. And the fact of the matter, though, this party, created by John Bell and also by Crittenden, another prominent person who was in favor of having a very modest approach to the issue of slavery towards the Constitution in the name of preserving the Union. That is all they want to do, is preserve the Union. Now let's take a look at these results. Okay, so let's look at the results of the 1860 presidential election. Look at the color coding on the map before we look at the pie charts on the right. You'll see that there is a lot of variety, but the colors that stand out the most are red and blue. Red is Lincoln. Blue is Southern Democrat Breckenridge. Look at what Douglas, the Northern Democrat, won. He won 1 state, a slave state, Missouri. He won part of New Jersey. You see that on the eastern seaboard. But Lincoln won every northern state, all free states, with the exception of that portion of New Jersey, which went to Douglas. Breckenridge won almost all southern states, including Maryland and Delaware. Bell took some of the more moderate states in the South, Virginia, Kentucky, and his home state of Tennessee. Interesting, Kentucky didn't even vote for their own son, Breckenridge. But you can see here the split between North and South. Really, only northern free states voted Republican, nobody else. And that's very important to point out. Now, what I want to do, let's take a look at these charts here on the right-hand side. Okay, so first I want to look at the popular vote, the middle graph there, the bottom pie chart. So you'll see it says that Lincoln won 40% of the vote. Not quite. He actually won 39.7%. He won less than 40% of the popular vote. So actually, more than 6 in 10 Americans who voted in this election did not vote for the guy who won. That's very interesting. Very interesting. Another interesting fact is look who came second in the popular vote. And it's Senator Stephen Douglas of Illinois. But notice, first of all, that he only carries one whole state, yet he gets the second most votes. That's interesting. So now what I want to do is let's look at the Electoral College vote. And of course, this is the one that matters the most. The Electoral College votes, which determines the future president. Lincoln won 59% of the electoral votes. And so actually, even if you combine the Northern and Southern Democrats and the Constitutional Union Party under Bell, Lincoln still would have won that election, which is remarkable considering he only got 39% of the vote. But that is the way it works in U.S. elections. So there you have it. You have the first Republican president of the United States. Now, what I want to do is let's look at a county by county map. And first, I want to look at the Northwest, or the Midwest as it's now called today. And you'll see that there is a bit of a mix there. So especially Illinois. A lot of Illinois, you can see, actually voted for Douglas, not for Lincoln. Seems like the bottom half voted for Douglas, the northern half voted for Lincoln. Now look over at New York City, and you'll see New York City voted for Douglas, not for Lincoln. But Lincoln took almost the rest of the state of New York, so therefore was able to carry it. Notice that every single county in New England voted Republican, voted for Lincoln. Now let's move down into the South, and you'll see that Breckenridge won most of the Deep South. But the Upper South, including North Carolina, which went to Breckenridge, and Maryland, which also went to Breckenridge, that they had a lot of counties who voted for Bell. So again, you can see that Upper South, Deep South divide. But Delaware, funny enough, every county in Delaware voted for Breckenridge. But if you go down to the Deep South, you'll see in Mississippi, you'll see the western part of the state, which was very, very wealthy, and also the bottom bit of Alabama, southernmost part, where you have a lot of very wealthy cotton plantations. Those areas voted for Bell, the Constitutional Union Party, and that's very interesting. And also, so did huge chunks of Georgia. But look at South Carolina, and you'll see that it's just gray. It's not color-coded at all. That's because South Carolina did not have a popular vote in 1860, so we don't have a county-county distribution the way we do with all the other states in the United States at the point. But South Carolina, of course, the electors did vote solidly for Breckenridge. Now let's look at Texas, and you'll see that Texas is really just East Texas at this point, as far as where people, there's enough people living where you're actually going to be able to have votes. And almost all of it went for Breckenridge. So Texas, yes, very much a southern state. And last thing I want to do is look over at Oregon and California. And interesting breakdown. In California, the most predominant color you see is green, Breckenridge. Second most common color is blue, Douglas. Third most common color is pink, Lincoln, and just barely. Yet Lincoln carried that state because he took the areas that were most populated. And the same is true with Oregon. You see a lot more green than you see any other color. Yet Breckenridge was not able to take any of either of those two far western states. And this leads us, of course, to the secession crisis. This is the pot boiling over. And that is what is most significant about the 1860 presidential election and the fallout from it. And that is what we will cover in our next lecture. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, please click on the like icon if you could, if you did like it. And please remember also to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time when we get to the actual secession crisis itself. Thank you. Bye-bye.